The entire hangar turned silent when she walked in, flight helmet under her arm. The colonel looked her up and down, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You really think this is Top Gun?" She didn't flinch. She climbed into the F-16, started the engine, and took off with the others. 30 minutes later, their formation was falling apart. One jet hit, one pilot unconscious, radios in chaos, and the only person still in control was the one they'd laughed at. What she did next would leave the entire base speechless and ground the colonel's career for good. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what part of the world are you watching from? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button. Captain Rachel Sterling never asked to be noticed. In fact, her entire military career had been a quiet, uphill war against a kind of noise that never showed up on flight logs, offhand remarks in briefing rooms, lowered voices behind her back, subtle smirks when her name appeared on rotation orders. She learned early that the uniform might be the same for everyone, but what it covered wasn't judged equally. She was 35 with over 1,000 flight hours logged, 3 overseas deployments, 2 commendations for split-second decision-making in airspace emergencies. And yet she still found herself sitting on folding chairs outside flight control, waiting to be needed. The base Maxwell Joint Air Training Center was known for its high-pressure training cycles and razor-sharp chain of command. Pilots came here to prove themselves before deployment or to sharpen skills before promotion. Rachel had been reassigned there last minute. Her orders transferred from a logistics command she'd been leading with excellence for 6 months. No explanation, just orders. And at Maxwell, orders were gospel. She arrived without fanfare, no welcome, no handshake, no tour. Just a locker number, a bunk assignment, and a memo clipped to a clipboard that read, "Captain Sterling, stand by, observe rotation." She knew what that meant. You don't fly unless someone else drops out. You sit through briefings. You take notes. You stay ready. It was a bureaucratic way of saying you're visible, but you're not essential. Her first week passed in relative silence. She didn't interrupt, didn't insist on anything. She showed up on time, absorbed the procedures, and stayed behind after each training simulation to recalibrate the computer inputs while the others hit the mess hall or the gym. Some of the younger pilots, fresh out of flight school or on their first operational assignment, barely looked her in the eye. To them, she was either a ghost or a placeholder, someone filling space until the real pilots needed it. Even the instructors didn't know what to make of her. She was there, but not really part of anything except the aircraft themselves. Every day, Rachel passed by the hangars where the jets were kept, always slowing her pace when she walked past the F-16s. She had flown one only 3 times in actual combat, but had spent over 100 hours in simulators and enough time in the real thing to feel its weight and power through the soles of her boots. At Maxwell, the F-16 was king. Every pilot who mattered trained in them. Every mission worth bragging about involved them. And unless your name was on the active flight schedule, you were invisible. She didn't mind the silence, but she noticed the looks, the ones that happened during mission briefings, how certain people would skim over her like she wasn't really in the room. The way Lieutenant Marcus Crowley, a hotshot with perfectly gelled hair and a flawless record of loud opinions, always seemed to talk louder when she was around, as if staking his claim on every inch of airspace in the room. And above them all was Colonel Harrison, the base training commander, ex-fighter pilot. Square jaw, spotless service medals arranged with military precision. The kind of man who stood with his arms folded, measuring everyone's worth with a single glance. He never addressed Rachel directly, only nodded vaguely when she passed, like acknowledging a technician or a clipboard rather than a pilot with over a decade of experience. The shift came on the morning of the VIP exercise. A congressional delegation was scheduled to tour the base, along with a few generals from Joint Staff Command. It was more show than substance, a display of air coordination, formation discipline, emergency response capabilities. Colonel Harrison wanted perfection, and perfection meant putting the same 3 pilots in the sky who always got the spotlight: Crowley, Lieutenant Rodriguez, and Major Davis. Rachel had been assigned, as usual, to the observation deck, watching through reinforced glass, while others demonstrated the skills she possessed but was never allowed to show. But an hour before takeoff, Major Davis twisted his ankle stepping down from a maintenance ladder. Nothing dramatic, just bad timing, enough to ground him for the day. Colonel Harrison was livid. The entire command staff watched from behind their computer screens, pretending not to see him pace like a caged animal. He hated improvising, especially under scrutiny. He needed a 3rd pilot to maintain the triangle formation that had been practiced for weeks. 2 other qualified pilots were already out on equipment checks at a sister base. 1 remaining pilot was unqualified for F-16 operations. Rachel Sterling was the only option left. When she appeared at the edge of the hangar, already suited up in full flight gear, helmet tucked under one arm, boots laced and secured, everything ready for immediate deployment. It took Colonel Harrison a full 5 seconds to register what he was seeing. He turned toward her, and the words that came out of his mouth would echo in the memory of every person who witnessed them. With a half laugh, half snarl that carried across the hangar floor, he said, You really think this is Top Gun?" The maintenance technician working nearby stopped moving. The technical staff froze mid-step. Crowley, leaning against his equipment ladder, let out a dry chuckle that spoke volumes about his expectations. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't smirk or show any reaction to the public humiliation. She didn't even blink. She simply walked past Colonel Harrison with measured steps, climbed into the jet that Major Davis had vacated, locked herself into the 5-point harness, and began the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Harrison stood there, his face flushed with a combination of anger and disbelief, but he didn't stop her. The checklist completed with electronic beeps, the canopy closed with hydraulic precision. The twin turbines roared to life with increasing intensity. And Rachel Sterling, the pilot no one had wanted in the sky, was suddenly airborne, flanked by Crowley on her right and Rodriguez trailing behind, rising like predatory birds into a crystal-clear blue sky. The morning air over Maxwell Base was unusually clear for mid-spring. No thermal pockets, no turbulence, just an endless ceiling of blue that stretched like a frozen ocean above the desert landscape. To untrained observers on the ground, it looked like perfect conditions for an aerial demonstration. To Rachel, it was a kind of deceptive calm that made pilots overconfident, detached from the unpredictability that always, eventually, made itself known. At 14,000 feet, the formation began to spread into its planned delta configuration. Rachel maintained her position flawlessly, nose alignment perfect, distance precisely maintained, eyes constantly scanning every instrument while remaining aware of the other aircraft's positions and movements. Crowley led the group, barking periodic updates over the communication system with the bravado of someone who believed his own publicity. Rodriguez flew anchor position, sweeping behind the formation and maintaining rear visual contact. Rachel stayed clean in the left wing position, close enough to catch the edge of Crowley's shadow on her fuselage. The VIP observation tower was already active with important voices. She could hear distant conversation from generals watching from the command suite, their observations being piped through to Colonel Harrison's headset. He offered them confident commentary. "That's Crowley on lead, best pilot in his class. Rodriguez in back position. Rock solid. Never miss a formation marker. And that's our substitute pilot on left wing. Just brought her in this month." He said her name as if he'd forgotten it entirely. There was no mention of her flight record, no explanation of why she was qualified to be there. She was simply a footnote in his narrative. They entered the first maneuver, a gentle spiral climb at 18,000 feet, designed to showcase synchronized roll capability. Crowley initiated first, rotating clean and crisp through the program sequence. Rodriguez followed with slight lag, adjusting his timing to match the lead aircraft. Rachel, precise as ever, adjusted by pure instinct and hit her roll angle exactly on time, her aircraft carving a perfect arc through the sky. The three planes carved a flawless helix into the morning air, sunlight flashing off their wings like strobes. From the observation tower, the generals nodded in approval. Harrison's voice carried unmistakable smugness. Tightest triangle formation we've flown this year. But Rachel wasn't listening to the congratulations. Her attention had shifted to something else entirely. A subtle tone bleeding through her headset, an unscheduled cross signal that wasn't originating from base communications or their formation frequency. It started as static, then developed into a whisper of open band radio distortion. She narrowed her focus, checking diagnostics across all her instrument panels. Everything read normal, but something was definitely wrong. Her heads-up display flickered just once. Barely perceptible, but unmistakable to someone trained to notice anomalies. Then Crowley's voice cut through the comm system, sharp with sudden concern. What the hell was that? Rachel looked right just in time to see Crowley's F-16 dip slightly, wobbling in a way that wasn't normal, was intentional. He overcorrected, his jet veering out of the triangle formation momentarily. Rodriguez, check 6. Crowley's voice continued, now with an edge of real worry. Did you see that? Copy, I saw something. You dropped altitude by about 30 feet. No apparent cause. No, I didn't, Crowley replied, but his voice carried doubt. Rachel's radar system pinged with a new contact. Close, fast, too close for any military aircraft clear to operate in their airspace. Then they all saw it simultaneously. A white flash crossing the right edge of their formation, like a blade cutting through air. A civilian drone, commercial grade, spinning completely out of control and climbing erratically into their flight path. Someone's expensive toy had malfunctioned catastrophically, turning it into a missile aimed directly at their formation. Crowley tried to bank away from the collision course, but his reaction came too late. The drone clipped his aircraft underside and detonated in a burst of shrapnel and electronic components. His F-16 jolted violently, immediately spiraling left with black smoke trailing from the engine housing. Warning alarms screamed across all communication frequencies. Rodriguez shouted for immediate base contact. Colonel Harrison's voice cracked through the chaos, no longer carrying any trace of his earlier smugness. Get them out of there! Abort the demonstration now. Rachel broke formation immediately, instinct overriding every protocol she'd been taught about maintaining position. Crowley's aircraft was bleeding altitude rapidly, his engine clearly on fire, external panels blown open and streaming debris. His communications cut in and out, becoming increasingly muffled and disoriented. I can't stabilize. His voice broke through the static. Hydraulics are gone. No response from primary controls. She knew that tone from her combat deployments. She'd heard it before during her second tour, when a pilot's voice broke just before complete system failure and unconsciousness. Crowley wasn't in control of his aircraft anymore. Rodriguez guided him down. Harrison's voice commanded from base control. But Rodriguez had veered too far away while trying to dodge the drone debris. His angle was wrong, his position useless for providing assistance. Rachel was the only pilot still in effective position to help. She dropped airspeed instantly, angling her aircraft into the underside of Crowley's trajectory, and engaged communication override protocols. Crowley, do not touch the throttle controls. Let go of the stick right now. He didn't respond immediately. She could imagine his hands trembling, trying desperately to recover control of an aircraft that was essentially a falling brick with wings. Do it! Let go! I've got you! Still nothing. So she made the decision for him. Rachel dropped her F-16 another 10 feet, pulled hard to the right, then angled her aircraft directly beneath his descent trajectory. She wasn't trying to intercept his fall. That would have killed them both. She was trying to guide it, to use her aircraft's position and her precise control inputs to influence his uncontrolled descent. If she could match his descent angle perfectly, if she could keep him level just long enough, maybe she could talk him through a survivable crash landing. Her eyes flicked constantly between airspeed indicators, angle measurements, fuel pressure readings. Her hands remained steady on the controls, her breathing even and controlled. Despite the fact that one wrong calculation would send both aircraft into the ground in a fireball that would be visible for miles. Down in the control tower, Colonel Harrison had stopped talking entirely. The generals watched in frozen silence as Rachel Sterling, the substitute pilot no one had trusted with a real mission, pulled her aircraft underneath the burning jet of their top pilot and began guiding him down in a tandem descent that defied every safety protocol in the book. Black smoke filled the sky in streaming ribbons. Altitude dropped steadily. One wrong move, one moment of lost concentration, and they would both become craters in the desert floor. At 8,000 feet, Crowley's left wing snapped completely off. His jet tilted sharply toward catastrophic spin. Rachel reacted instantly, flaring her aircraft, rolling left, cutting power momentarily, then reigniting as she slid underneath the falling debris field. Her vertical stabilizer caught the edge of Crowley's airframe, a grinding impact that sent vibrations through both aircraft. She didn't flinch. The collision actually steadied Crowley's aircraft for 2 crucial seconds, long enough for his survival instincts to kick in and regain a sliver of conscious control. His voice returned, raspy and broken but functional. "Sterling, keep your hands off my controls." She brought him down like that, inch by inch, bleeding altitude while managing 2 aircraft flight paths simultaneously, anticipating every shift of wind, every wobble in aerodynamic balance. When they reached 3,000 feet, she broke formation smoothly and took a steep vector toward the emergency landing strip that base crews had been preparing since the moment the crisis began. Crowley's aircraft fell into its final descent path, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Fire crews waited with sirens already screaming, foam trucks positioned for immediate response. Rachel didn't land immediately, not yet. She maintained visual contact with his aircraft until it hit the tarmac, bounced twice, skidded sideways, and finally slid to a complete stop surrounded by emergency foam. Crowley was alive. Unconscious, but alive. Only then did Rachel bring her own jet down for landing. Not a scratch on her aircraft, not a single system showing damage from the maneuver that had just saved a man's life. The sound of her engine still echoed faintly across the base as she taxied to her assigned parking spot. But inside the emergency command room, the air was thick with a silence that no one dared break. The moment Captain Rachel Sterling stepped out of her aircraft and walked across the tarmac toward the debriefing area, soaked in sweat, helmet tucked under one arm, her boots leaving residue tracks on the concrete, every head turned in her direction. But no one spoke immediately. It wasn't admiration. Not yet. It was confusion, disbelief, the kind of stunned quiet that follows a miracle no one fully understands. The medical teams were still working on Crowley near the edge of the landing strip. He was conscious now, his eyes unfocused, clearly shaken by the experience, but very much alive. The fire suppression crews had managed to extinguish his engine fire before it reached the fuel tanks. A few minutes later, and the ending would have been entirely different. He would never speak about flying with quite the same casual arrogance again. Not with the same swagger, not with the same edge, but at least he would speak. Inside the main briefing hall, the visiting generals had returned to their seats. Their conversation was muted now, their eyes still fixed on the replay monitor showing high-resolution aerial footage from one of the chase planes that had captured the entire rescue sequence. General Martinez, commander of Air Mobility Operations, stood with his arms crossed, watching the footage loop for the third time. He hadn't said a word since the emergency had resolved itself. Colonel Harrison stood off to the side, his hands clenched behind his back, jaw muscles working overtime. His face was flushed in a way that had nothing to do with desert heat. He had spent years building a carefully constructed reputation, a standard of control and hierarchical authority that defined his entire approach to command. And in the space of 27 minutes, that entire structure had collapsed in front of the highest-ranking officers in the Air Force. Not because of enemy action or mechanical failure, but because the pilot he had openly mocked and publicly dismissed had just saved his base from national embarrassment and prevented his best pilot from becoming a smoking crater in the Nevada desert. And she had done it all without waiting for official permission. Rachel stood near the back of the briefing room, still in her flight suit, saying nothing. Her expression was unreadable but calm, the same composure she had demonstrated in the cockpit, in the sky, in the moment when everyone else had frozen with uncertainty. General Martinez finally turned away from a monitor. "Which one of you assigned her to standby status?" No one answered immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Colonel Harrison shifted slightly. "Captain Sterling was recently transferred to our facility. I didn't have complete flight evaluations on her record when I drafted the rotation assignments." Martinez nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious. Yet according to her file, she's logged over 1,000 flight hours, completed 3 emergency extractions in Afghanistan, and successfully landed a damaged aircraft during a sandstorm with locked rudder controls. You had access to all of that information. Why was she grounded? Harrison hesitated, then answered with deliberate formality. "I made a judgment call based on available resources and current operation requirements." Martinez didn't blink. "That judgment call nearly cost you 2 pilots, a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and created a potential PR disaster during a congressional oversight visit." He turned his attention directly to Rachel. "She corrected your mistake." Rachel remained motionless, her eyes locked on the general, saying nothing. There was a pause, 10 seconds of absolute stillness, while every person in the room shifted their attention between the general and the captain. Then the monitor flickered again, showing the final replay. Rachel's F-16 sliding smoothly underneath Crowley's spiraling aircraft, guiding it down through smoke and fire like a steel guardian angel. General Martinez pointed toward the screen. That maneuver, the final vector alignment, the precision timing, that wasn't textbook procedure. That wasn't simulation-level coordination. That was muscle memory developed under combat conditions. That was battlefield instinct. You don't acquire skills like that from standby duty. You develop them in war zones. He stepped closer to Rachel. "Captain, who taught you to fly like that?" Rachel's voice was steady when she answered. "My father, sir. He flew with the 442nd Fighter Wing in Iraq. He taught me never to wait for official authorization when I could see what needed to be done." Another general leaned forward from his position at the briefing table. "What was his name?" She didn't hesitate. "Colonel Michael Sterling, sir." A long pause followed that statement. Even Harrison recognized the name, a decorated Air Force combat pilot, posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. His reputation still referenced in advanced tactical training manuals and memorial services. His name echoed in textbooks and training facilities across the country. And now it echoed through flight logs and after-action reports through the actions of his daughter. No one in the briefing room had known about her heritage because no one had bothered to investigate beyond surface-level personnel files. General Martinez nodded and turned back to address the room. I want a complete incident report file within 24 hours. I want Captain Sterling's name included in the post-flight commendations. And I want a detailed explanation of why she wasn't already cleared for lead mission status. Then he looked directly at Colonel Harrison. You'll provide that explanation in writing. Harrison stiffened, his jaw clenching, but he said nothing. Rachel remained perfectly still. She didn't smile, didn't show any satisfaction at the public vindication. She simply waited. When the generals left the briefing room one by one, Harrison was the last person remaining. He walked slowly toward Rachel, his expression unreadable. The confidence, the arrogance, the swagger that had defined his command style since her first day on base, all of it was gone, replaced by something heavier and more complex. He stopped a few feet away from her, looked at the floor, then finally met her eyes. "You saved his life," he said quietly. Rachel nodded once. "Yes, sir." Harrison looked down again. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice far quieter than anyone had ever heard from him, "Dismissed, Captain." She turned, walked away, and left him standing alone in the silence he had created for himself. The base didn't transform overnight, but something fundamental in its atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't loud or official. There were no speeches, no medal ceremonies, no formations of officers standing at attention. But the silence that used to follow Rachel Sterling when she walked into any room, that vacuum of recognition built from institutional neglect, had changed into something else entirely. Respect. Unspoken but unmistakable. She was no longer the substitute, the observer, the backup option. No one said it explicitly, but everyone remembered what they had witnessed. Every time she crossed the hangar floor, maintenance crews made way without being asked. The younger pilots watched her movements with the kind of attention normally reserved for senior instructors. Some even stopped their work mid-task just to observe how she adjusted equipment straps, how she checked wing panel alignments, how she reviewed flight manifests with methodical precision. The pilots who had ignored her before now approached with genuine questions. Not challenges to her authority, but requests for knowledge they recognized she possessed. Crowley didn't return to flight status for 3 weeks. When he did, he said nothing about the incident to anyone. Not because of shame or embarrassment, but because no words could adequately describe the experience of being saved by someone he had dismissed. He carried the memory differently now. He trained harder, spoke less, and looked at Rachel with a kind of wordless gratitude that men like him didn't know how to express verbally. The new rotation schedule arrived on a Friday afternoon. Rachel's name appeared at the top of the flight roster. Lead pilot. No asterisks, no conditional status markers. Her briefing packet included advanced simulator time, command of her own squadron, and full flight authority on all aircraft types stationed at Maxwell. No one commented on the change. No one questioned the decision. Colonel Harrison didn't sign the orders personally. They came from higher command authority. In the weeks that followed, nothing about Rachel's daily routine changed significantly. She still arrived early, still performed her own equipment calibrations, still stayed late after flights to assist technical crews with sensor realignment and diagnostic procedures. But when she walked into the ready room now, the atmosphere didn't skip a beat. It fell into formation behind her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through actions that spoke louder than any words or official pronouncements. Because on a day when everything mattered most, she had done what no one else could do. Word of the incident spread slowly and selectively, first through unofficial conversations at other military installations, then through internal memoranda that circulated quietly through command channels, marked confidential but impossible to ignore completely. The aerial footage was reviewed, studied, broken down frame by flight instructors and tactical analysts. Training manuals were quietly updated. A new emergency coordination procedure was officially logged under the designation Sterling Maneuver. though she never used that term herself. To Rachel, it was simply doing what the situation required. Her personal locker remained largely unchanged. Same helmet, same neatly folded uniform shirts. But there was one small addition, a photograph tucked behind the inner edge of the locker door. It was old, faded by time and handling. Her father standing beside an F4 Phantom. Sunlight in his eyes, a slight smile on his weathered face. No caption, no date notation, just memory and presence. One morning, a handwritten letter appeared, slipped under her door sometime during the night. No envelope, no signature, just a folded piece of paper with careful handwriting. We were wrong. You didn't fly like one of the best pilots we'd ever seen. You flew like the only pilot who could have saved him. She never mentioned the letter to anyone. She didn't need external validation. She pinned it behind the photograph and continued with her duties. Each time she walked across the tarmac toward a line of aircraft waiting in the rising sun, she carried no extra emotional weight, no resentment, no sense of debt owed or scores to be settled. Only precision, only purpose, only the knowledge that her skills existed to serve something larger than personal recognition. Because the impossible rescue hadn't just saved Marcus Crowley's life. It had reminded everyone on the base why some people don't rise to meet extraordinary challenges. They carry extraordinary capability with them every day, every flight, every moment of their professional lives. And when crisis arrives, they don't rise to the occasion. They become the reason others survive to see another day. Rachel Sterling didn't ask for applause. She didn't need official commendations or press coverage. What she needed was an aircraft, a mission, and the opportunity to serve. And when that opportunity presented itself, she didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. They had laughed when she walked into that hangar. They had doubted, dismissed, and looked away when her name appeared on schedules. But now, no one on Maxwell Air Base could forget what they had witnessed. Because when everything failed, when radios filled with chaos, when formations collapsed, when lives hung in the balance by threads no thicker than hope, she didn't rise to meet the challenge. She became the reason everyone made it home safely. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe voices like Rachel's deserve to be heard and remembered, hit that subscribe button. This community grows stronger with every story we share, and your presence here truly matters. Thank you for being part of those who left a trace.